There are nights in New York when the rain doesn't just fall, it presses. It leans against the glass like it's trying to get inside. On the 72nd floor of Thorne& Company, a man sat alone in a fragrance lab built to outlive him. The city glowed behind him in blurred streaks of golden blue, but Julian Thorne barely noticed. His world had shrunk to a single glass beaker, and the truth he no longer wanted to admit. He lifted a blotter strip, brought it to his nose, and inhaled. Slow, deliberate, almost desperate. Nothing. A faint flash of citrus, a whisper of alcohol. But the melody, the heart, the thing that made a scent breathe, remained silent. The strip trembled in his hand. 5 years ago, he could have named every layer blindfolded. He could smell a formula and tell you where it needed warmth, where it needed shadow, where it needed breath. But tonight, the air of a 3-generation perfume house couldn't even resurrect the family's most beloved fragrance, Ciel de Nuit, the night sky. The last masterpiece his grandfather ever created. Julian had memorized every story behind it, how the scent was born during a blackout in Grasse, how his grandmother Shaw carried traces of it for decades, how people used to say it reminded them of standing under a sky so blue it almost hurt. Chefs lose taste, painters lose sight. A perfumer losing scent. That was something else entirely. He capped the vial with shaking fingers, opened his notebook, and forced himself to write version 37. Chemically correct, emotionally dead. The trash bin at his feet overflowed with discarded strips, little white flags of surrender. He grabbed another bottle, measured another ratio, whispered to himself the way exhausted people do when trying to stay alive inside their own minds. Again. Just try again. But the moment he leaned in to smell the new blend, the edges of the room softened. His vision blurred. Exhaustion crept up his spine like a slow frost. He lasted 3 more seconds before his body made the decision for him. His forehead lowered onto his folded arm. The pen rolled off the page and the CEO of Thorne & Company fell asleep in the middle of the storm. 2 floors down, the service elevator opened with a tired clang. Ara Fernandez pushed her cleaning cart out into the hallway, one hand massaging the ache in her wrist. It was the kind of pain that didn't scare her anymore. Just another reminder of 20 hours worked, 3 floors scrubbed, and a paycheck that never quite kept up with reality. The building was quiet at this hour, too quiet. Quiet enough for the lonely hum of fluorescent lights to echo down the corridor. She checked the clipboard clipped to her cart. R&D lab still unchecked. Great, exactly what she needed. She pushed the cart forward. The wheel squeaked every 3rd rotation, a rhythm she'd grown used to over the years. When she reached the lab doors, she tapped her badge against the reader. The light blinked green. The scent hit her before the door even opened. Not perfume, not exactly. A crowded storm of citrus, floral, wood, alcohol notes fighting for space, clashing in midair with no intention of stopping. Her doctor called it hyperosmia. She called it a curse. Most people smelled nice fragrances. Ara smelled imbalanced ingredients that were meant to blend but refused to. She pushed the door wider and stepped inside, and that's when she saw him. A man in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, head resting on his arm, asleep beside an ocean of glass bottles. She didn't need a framed photo from the lobby to recognize him. Julian Thorne. She froze. Her pulse hit her throat hard. She wasn't supposed to be here while he was here. No cleaner was. Her brain told her to back out, close the door, pretend she saw nothing. But the scent in the room clawed at her senses. Too sharp, too loud, too wrong. It wasn't curiosity that pulled her toward the workstation. It was discomfort, physical discomfort. She approached the bench carefully, like stepping into someone's private memory. A notebook lay open under the CEO's arm. A beaker half filled with a pale liquid sat beside it. The label read, Ciel de Nuit 37, her breath caught. She hadn't smelled the real thing since she was 10, since her mother used to dab the last drops on her wrist before important days. It wasn't the kind of scent you forgot. Even now, the memory hit her with a quiet ache. She picked up one of the clean blotter strips, dipped it into V37, and lifted it toward her nose. The citrus slammed into her senses first. Bergamot. Too much of it. Neroli trapped beneath it, suffocating instead of glowing. A wood note struggled underneath like someone knocking from behind a closed door. She flinched. Too much bergamot, she whispered before her brain could stop her. It's killing the sandalwood. Her voice barely rose above a breath, but it drifted into the empty room like a confession. Her eyes moved to the organ, a wall of perfectly arranged bottles. She found the one she needed instantly. Ambrette seed, warm, soft, human. Her hand hovered. Her heart pounded. She wasn't allowed to touch anything. She knew that. But walking away from an unbalanced scent felt like leaving a painting crooked on the wall. She uncapped the bottle, drew the tiniest drop into a pipette, and leaned over the beaker. One drop, she murmured. Just one. The drop fell. The liquid shifted. The air changed. She dipped a fresh strip, inhaled, exhaled. Better. Still not perfect, but no longer screaming. Her chest finally loosened, and then the exhaustion she'd been holding back all night came for her all at once. Her knees softened. The leather chair beside the workstation looked like the softest surface she'd seen in months. 5 minutes, she told herself. Just 5. She sat. The chair embraced her tired body. Her eyes lowered, her head touched the edge of the open notebook. And Ara Fernandez, who had survived far worse than exhaustion, fell asleep in the CEO's lab with the corrected formula breathing softly beside her. Julian woke to the quiet kind of morning light, the kind that slipped between bottles and reflected in soft gold. He lifted his head slowly and froze. There in his chair, wrapped in his jacket without remembering how it got there, lay a girl in a janitor's uniform, sleeping beside his notebook, beside his formula. He opened his mouth to speak, but something else reached him first. A scent, warm, rounded, balanced, the kind of scent he hadn't been able to recognize in years. He picked up a test strip with trembling fingers, brought it to his nose, inhaled, and the world changed. Julian held the strip still, unwilling to move, almost unwilling to blink. He inhaled again. This time the scent unfurled, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for his mind to recognize shape. Bergamot softened, neroli warm, sandalwood steady, and somewhere in the heart of it, a gentle musk that held the whole structure together. Ambrette! Someone had added Ambrette. He lowered the strip slowly. Then he looked at the girl sleeping in his chair as if for the first time. Her head rested on his notebook, one arm tucked beneath it. The rise and fall of her breath was even, the kind that came only after a body had gone far past its limit. His jacket was wrapped around her shoulders, but he didn't remember placing it there. Maybe he had done it half asleep. Maybe instinct had moved before memory. He wasn't sure. But the scent of the formula was real, and she had touched it. Julian rose from his stool quietly, cautiously, as if sudden movement might break whatever fragile revelation hovered between them. He stepped closer and leaned just enough to catch the air around her. Not perfume, not detergent, not industrial cleaner. Something warm, human. A faint vanilla note, soft, comforting, like the echo of a childhood kitchen. And beneath it, petrichor, the unmistakable scent of wet concrete after rain. His breath stilled. How could someone smell like that at 2 o'clock in the morning? His eyes moved to the bench, the pipette, the slight shift in the organ bottles, the beaker still warm from the night's work. His formula hadn't balanced itself. Someone had intervened. She had intervened. He reached out, touched her shoulder lightly. Miss. His voice was low, careful. Wake up. You'll hurt your neck like that. Ara jerked awake, eyes wide, adrenaline wiping away the fog of exhaustion. Her hand flew to the notebook, then to the jacket, then to her badge. I'm sorry, I didn't mean I wasn't supposed to. She stood so fast the chair rolled back a few inches. Please don't fire me. I swear I didn't touch anything. I must have. Julian raised a hand. Stop. His tone wasn't sharp, just precise enough to halt her panic. He held up the blotter strip. What did you do to this? Ara froze. Her eyes flicked to the beaker, to the organ, to the pipette still resting on the counter. Her throat tightened. There was no version of this where she didn't look guilty. I can explain, she whispered, but you're not going to like it. Try me. She swallowed, eyes dropping to the floor. The formula was shouting, she said softly. Too much bergamot. It was drowning the sandalwood. The top note was wrong. He stared at her. Most perfumers took years to train their nose to identify imbalance. Years to develop the instinct to describe scent as emotion instead of chemistry. She had done it half asleep in a room she wasn't meant to enter. "And the ambrette?" he asked. She nodded once. A single drop, just enough to hold the citrus down without killing it. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not tense, more like two puzzle pieces realizing they might actually fit. Julian set the strip down. "What's your name?" "Ara," she whispered. "Ara Fernandez." "And I'm really very sorry, you shouldn't be." His voice surprised even himself. She blinked. "You're not angry. If you had ruined it," he said quietly, "I would know." He paused. "But you didn't. You improved it." Her breath caught. Julian stepped closer, not imposing, not looming, simply closing the space between a perfumer lost in his own storm and the unexpected lifeline standing in front of him. "You have a rare nose," he said. "Hyperosmia. How did you—" People with ordinary senses don't describe bergamot as shouting. She shifted her weight, unsure whether to step back or breathe. He glanced around the lab, then back at her. "You work here as night cleaning staff?" "3 shifts," she murmured. "I'm just trying to keep my job." Her hands twisted together. Her badge swung slightly. Her exhaustion still clung to her like a second skin. Julian understood 2 things instantly. 1, she was talented. 2, she didn't believe a single good thing about herself. He closed the notebook, slid it toward her. "I need you to tell me exactly what you smelled last night," he said. "Every imbalance, every shift, every instinct." Her eyebrows knit in confusion. "Why?" "Because I haven't smelled a complete fragrance in 5 years," he answered. "And because you just did what 3 senior perfumers failed to do." She stared at him, unable to speak, unable to decide whether this was a punishment, a test, or the strangest moment of grace in her life. Julian guided the beaker closer to her. "Help me," he said simply, not an order, a request, a rare one. "For one night, tell me what I can't smell." Ara hesitated. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her brother's medication bill sat unopened on her counter. Her 3rd job barely covered rent. She didn't belong in this room. She didn't belong anywhere near a man like him. But the scent in that beaker, the one she had touched, the one that finally breathed. Her voice was quiet but steady. "What do you want me to do?" Julian's expression softened. "I want you to be the nose I don't have," he said. "The part of this legacy I can't reach alone." Ara exhaled, long, shaky, disbelieving. "Just for one night?" she asked. "For now." The words hung between them like a promise neither of them understood yet. But both of them felt it. The world had shifted. 2 lives, one polished, one worn down, had collided in the only room where scent could change fate. And neither of them was leaving untouched. Some people enter your life quietly. No grand entrance, no warning. Yet somehow they walk straight into the place you've been trying to protect the most. For Julian, that place was this lab. For Ara, it was the belief she didn't belong in rooms like this. But the moment she leaned over the bench again, something subtle changed. Not in the scent, in the air between them. Ara stepped closer to the organ, the wall of small, amber bottles arranged like a cathedral of glass and memory. She hovered her hand above the top row, instinct guiding her far more confidently than any training manual ever could. Julian watched her like she was doing something sacred. "Start with the top note," he said softly. She nodded, picked up the bergamot bottle and brought it close to her nose without opening it. A faint pressure hit her senses, sharp at the edges, hollow at the center. "It's too bright," she said. "Not sunlight bright, hospital bright." Julian's head lifted slightly. That wasn't a description any consultant had ever given him. She placed it down and reached for the Neroli. "This one wants to be soft," she murmured, "like warm skin after a shower, but the bergamot keeps pushing it away." Julian pulled his notebook toward him. "Keep going." Ara hesitated. "This isn't how perfumers usually talk." "Good," he said. "I don't need usual." A quiet beat of understanding passed between them. She continued. "Sandalwood, oak moss, a small vial of musk that she lifted gently as if afraid it might bruise." Each time she described not the chemical structure, but the emotion, the temperature, the sensation. Julian wrote every word. Her voice was soft at first, then steadier, more sure, as though for the first time in years someone was listening to her, not out of politeness, but because her mind mattered. When she finished, the lab fell quiet. Julian looked down at the page, reading her descriptions like scripture. Shouting bergamot, sandalwood buried under concrete, neroli so tight it can't breathe, a bass note trying to be brave. He closed the notebook slowly. "Ara," he asked, "how long have you had a nose like this?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Always. It's not something I talk about. Why not? Because it makes people uncomfortable. They think I'm exaggerating or complaining or making things up. She inhaled deeply. Where they say it's useless. Smelling things isn't a job. Julian leaned back, studying her carefully. That's not true, he said quietly. In this world, your nose is everything. She didn't answer not because she disagreed, but because the words hit too close to the part of her she'd spent years ignoring. A soft hum broke the silence. The low vibration of the HV system cycling on. The shift in air stirred the surface of the beaker, releasing a small new wave of the improved scent. Julian closed his eyes. Even faint, even filtered through the broken remains of his sense of smell, he felt the change. There's something here, he murmured. Something alive. Ara watched him. Watched the way his shoulders lowered just a little. Watched the way his hand rested on the bench as though steadying himself against relief he wasn't ready to feel out loud. You really can't smell it, she asked softly. Not the way you do, he admitted. Some notes cut through. Most don't. He tapped the notebook. But what you did last night, I felt it. A pause. Not the awkward kind, the honest kind. Ara lowered her gaze. I'm glad it helped. Julian took a breath, then spoke with a careful weight. You did more than help. She looked up. You saved it, he said. You saved Ciel de Nuit. Ara blinked. The compliment wasn't dressed up. It wasn't exaggerated. It was simply true. But truth, when delivered this gently, hit harder than flattery ever could. I didn't mean to interfere, she whispered. I just couldn't walk away from a scent like that. You didn't interfere, Julian said. You saw something I couldn't. Her breath trembled. Not from fear, but from the strange, disarming feeling of being valued. She stepped back from the bench. Reality returned in a rush. I should go, she said quickly. My supervisor checks time logs. If they see I stayed too long, Julian shook his head. You're not in trouble. I fell asleep in your lab, she reminded him, mortified, and improved your formula in the process. She laughed once under her breath, surprised by the sound. I don't think that counts as an excuse in corporate policy. For most people, Julian agreed. For you, it does. Ara's eyes softened. Why? He held the beaker up between them. Because no one has done this since my grandfather. Her breath caught and then, soft, almost reluctant, a smile appeared on her face. Not a bright smile, not a cheerful one, a small, fragile, honest one. The kind that grows only in places where no one expects joy to belong. Julian checked his watch. Morning was creeping closer. Real life, with all its deadlines, board meetings, and consequences, waited on the other side of the elevator doors. He didn't want this moment to vanish into the noise. Ara, he said, I'm going to need your help again. She froze, her fingers tightened on her badge. The exhaustion in her eyes returned along with something else. Fear of being pulled into a world that wasn't built for people like her. I'm just a cleaner, she said quietly. No, he replied with a certainty he hadn't felt about anything in years. You're the only person who's understood this fragrance in a decade. Her lips parted, stunned. He took one small step closer, enough for his voice to lower without being intimate. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking because we're running out of time, and I can't do this without you. Ara swallowed. Just tell me what you need, she said. Julian exhaled a breath that sounded like relief, like trust, like the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. Tonight, he said, come back tonight. The storm outside had finally stopped. But in the lab, in the quiet space between their two lives, something new had begun. Some choices don't feel like decisions at all. They feel like gravity pulling two people into a moment neither planned, but both were already walking toward. That night, the lab felt different. Not brighter, not warmer, just quieter, like the room itself was waiting. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out cautiously, still wearing her Navy cleaning uniform, still carrying the weight of a double shift at the hospital. Her badge clinked softly against her chest. The building smelled like disinfectant and polished metal. Familiar, tiring, predictable. But the second she pushed the lab door open, the air changed. It always changed in here. Citrus, alcohol, and something else. New, unsteady, alive, resting somewhere in the middle. Julian stood near the bench, sleeves rolled, notebook open, hair slightly out of place from running his hands through it one too many times. He looked up the moment she entered. Ara. Her name sounded different tonight, less like he had memorized it, more like he had been waiting for it. She hovered near the door. Your message said it was urgent. It is, he replied. We're running out of time. He motioned her closer. She approached slowly, eyes flicking to the organ, the workbench, the beaker. Each object now linked to a version of her she didn't know how to become again without falling apart. Julian rested both hands on the counter. We need to talk about what happened last night. She tensed. If this is about me touching your work, it's not about blame, he cut in. It's about truth. He reached for the blotter strip she'd corrected, the faintest residue of her instinct still clinging to it. You improved this, he said simply. I didn't imagine it. I didn't exaggerate it. What you did was precise, intentional, correct. Her heartbeat pressed against her ribs. I didn't mean to step out of line, she whispered. What you did, Julian said, was step into the place you were meant to be. The words fell between them like soft thunder. Ara looked away. I'm a cleaner, Julian. I know chemicals because I clean them. I know scents because I can't escape them. That's not the same as what you do. He studied her a moment, really studied her. How many jobs do you have? He asked. She blinked, thrown off by the question. 3, she admitted. Hospital, warehouse, and here. And how many hours have you worked today? 15, she murmured. And how many hours this week? She swallowed. Enough. Julian exhaled slowly. You're exhausted, he said. Overworked, undervalued. Yet even in that state, you smelled what I couldn't. You fixed what others couldn't. You saved a fragrance I've spent months failing to resurrect. Ara crossed her arms, trying to protect herself from the weight of his sincerity. I don't think you understand, she whispered. People like me. We don't get opportunities. We get warnings. We get replaced. We get told to stay quiet and keep the floors clean. Julian stepped closer but carefully, like approaching something fragile but not weak. Ara, he said quietly, people like you rebuild what people like me only think we understand. She lifted her eyes. Something in his expression made her nervous. Not because he was powerful, but because he wasn't hiding behind his power. He shifted slightly, leaning into the counter. I'm going to be direct with you, he said. I need your nose, your instincts, your way of hearing scent when others only rate it. Her throat tightened. You don't even know me. I know enough, Julian replied. Enough to know my company is in danger. Enough to know Ciel de Nuit is the only thing that can save it. Enough to know I cannot recreate it without someone who smells the world differently. He paused. Without you. Silence settled. Not heavy, not strange, just full. He slid a folder across the counter. A thin one, a discreet one. I've drafted a proposal, he said. Ara's eyebrows furrowed. A proposal for what? A partnership, Julian answered. A hidden one. She didn't touch the folder. A partnership, she echoed, between a CEO and a janitor. No, his voice softened. Between a perfumer and the ghost who completes his work. She blinked. Ghost? Ghost perfumer, he said. A behind-the-scenes nose. Anonymous, protected. No public record. You would come at night, work only with me. Your name stays off every document. Ara stared at him as if he had placed a star map in front of her and asked her to navigate. And in return, she whispered. Julian didn't hesitate. I'll cover your brother's entire medical bill, he said. All of it. No conditions, no expiration. Her breath broke. Noah's prescriptions, the surgeries, the overdue notices stacking on her kitchen counter. The fear she carried every time her phone buzzed. The impossible math she did every night. She pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to hold something in place. That's too much, she said. I don't want charity. It isn't charity, he said. It's payment for your skill, for your time, for the things you can smell that I can't. Ara closed her eyes. Her world wasn't built for choices like this. Her world was built on survival, not opportunity. What if I mess up? She whispered. Julian shook his head. You won't. You don't know that. I do, he said. Because last night you made the first version of Ciel de Nuit that had a pulse. Her eyes filled with something unsteady, fear, hope, disbelief, all tangled together. She opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple contract. Clean, minimal, no tricks. At the bottom was a single line. Ghost perfumer, confidential creative partnership, and beneath that, a space for her name. Ara stared at it a long moment. Then she looked up. Julian, she whispered. Why me? He held her gaze without looking away. Because you're the only person who's given this fragrance a heart, he said. And I need you to help me bring it back to life. A quiet, decisive breath left her lungs. She picked up the pen. Her hands shook as she signed, not out of fear, but because for the first time in years, something was opening instead of closing. Julian watched her sign, watched the ink dry, watched the moment change both their lives. When she finished, she set the pen down, and he said the words that officially ended Act One. Welcome to Thorne and Company, Ara. The room, the storm, the world shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for fate to notice. Some partnerships begin with a contract. Others begin with a question no one else dared to ask. But the rare ones, the ones that change a life, begin with two people stepping into the same room and slowly discovering they breathe the world in different ways. For Julian and Ara, that room was the Thorne and Company lab. At midnight, Ara arrived for her first official night as ghost perfumer just before the clock hit 12. She paused at the door badge halfway to the reader. Unsure if she was allowed to feel nervous about a job no one would ever know she held inside. The lights were dimmed, the lab looked less like a workplace and more like a place built for secrets. Julian was already there. He didn't greet her with the sharp formality of a CEO. He simply nodded, an acknowledgement that tonight they were equals in a world of glass bottles and invisible notes. "You're on time," he said. "I didn't want to mess this up," she replied softly. He shook his head. "You won't." And just like that, the night began. The first thing he showed her wasn't machinery. It wasn't a formula. It was a small, unassuming bottle labeled Orris butter. He set it between them like an offering. "This," he said, "is one of the rarest ingredients we own." Ara lifted it carefully as if it were a heartbeat in a bottle. "Smell it," Julian said. She opened it, inhaled. The scent rose slowly, powdery, cool, almost melancholic, quiet but steady, like something that had waited years to be found. "It smells like waiting," she whispered. "Like the bottom of an old makeup bag, lipstick, dust, something soft that took a long time to become soft." Julian stilled. No perfumer he'd ever trained had described it that way, and they were professionals. He stepped closer. "Do you know how long it takes to make?" "How long?" 3 years, he said, sometimes 5. Orris root has to be aged, dried, and processed before it even begins to smell like this. Ara's eyes widened, not dramatically, just enough to show the weight of that timeline. "That's a lot of time," she murmured. "Yes," he said. "The world rushes everything but scent. Scent refuses to be rushed." For a moment, neither spoke. Something about that line settled into both of them. Julian's quiet grief for a legacy slipping away, and Ara's quiet exhaustion from a life that never gave her time to breathe. They moved through ingredients the way two musicians test instruments before performing. Vetiver, labdanum, amber, each with its own heartbeat. Julian taught her the technical terms. Ara taught him the emotional language he'd forgotten. "It smells metallic," she said once. "Metallic, how?" he asked. "Like coins in a warm hand," she replied. He wrote it down immediately. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't training, this was translation. Two worlds finally speaking the same language. Hours passed, though neither noticed. Their movements around the workstation fell into rhythm. Her reaching for a note, him adjusting the ratio, her closing her eyes to imagine the scent on skin, him scribbling her instinct into scientific structure. At one point, Julian reached around her to grab a bottle behind her shoulder. His hand brushed hers. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't suggestive. It was proximity. Simple, human, electric. Ara froze just for half a second. Julian pulled back gently, respecting the space. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's okay," she said, but her voice carried something new. Not discomfort, not fear, awareness. The kind that can't be unfelt once recognized. When the clock neared 3 o'clock in the morning, Julian uncapped another bottle and handed it to her. "Tell me what this is," he said. She smelled it slowly, letting every note show itself. "It's comforting," she said. "Warm, skin-like, not perfume, more like someone's presence." He nodded, pleased. "Ambret," he said, "the same one you used last night." She couldn't help but smile. "You trusted my instinct?" "I trusted the result," he corrected. "And now I trust the instinct." Her smile deepened, but only a little. Ara wasn't someone who smiled easily. Life had taught her not to. But tonight, something softened on her face and him in the room. They took a break. If two people standing beside each other in silence, sipping instant coffee could be called a break. Julian leaned against the counter. "Why didn't you pursue perfumery?" he asked. Ara stared into her cup. Life didn't really ask what I wanted. Maybe it should have, he said. She didn't answer. He didn't push. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. When they returned to the bench, their movements were firmer, more certain. Notes began forming something close to a rough prototype. Not seen, not yet, but alive enough to make both of them breathe deeper. Ara leaned over the mixture. It's missing weight, she murmured. Something with presence. Julian searched the organ. Amber? Woods? Leather? She shook her head. No, something more human. He traced her gaze to the small bottle of ambrette she'd reached for last night. You really like that one, he said. It feels honest, she replied. He didn't write that word down. He kept it in his mind exactly where he needed it. By the time they wrapped up, it was nearly dawn. The city outside was turning from black to blue. Ara gathered her things, ready to disappear before the morning staff arrived. But Julian stopped her gently. Ara, he said, before you go, there's something I didn't ask yesterday. She turned. What is it? Your brother, he said. How old is he? She blinked. The question was unexpected, personal, real. 16, she said softly. He's been sick for a long time. Julian nodded once. No pity, no attempt to fix something he didn't understand, just acknowledgement. He's lucky to have you, he said. She swallowed. Her voice barely made it out. I'm the lucky one. Julian didn't correct her, not because he agreed, but because he finally understood how much weight she carried and how much she had given him without meaning to. As she reached for the door, he spoke one last time. Ara. She looked back. Same time tomorrow night. A breath escaped her, soft, unsure, hopeful. Yes, she said, tomorrow. And just like that, the storm that had swallowed both their lives began to shift. Not enough to calm, not enough to clear, just enough for two people to realize they were no longer weathering it alone. Every great story has a turning point, a moment when the threat doesn't announce itself with noise, but with silence. And in Thorne and Company, silence was where power lived. By the third night of working together, Julian and Ara had fallen into a rhythm so natural it felt as if the lab itself moved around them. He measured, she smelled, he adjusted, she translated. Each night, the formula grew more coherent, more alive. But what neither of them noticed, at least not at first, was the man watching from the glass corridor outside the lab. Victor Sterling, Chief Operating Officer, and in his mind, the future owner of Thorne and Company. He stood with his hands behind his back, posture polished, expression unreadable. He wasn't interested in music. He was interested in control. And Julian's sudden nightly presence in the lab had shifted the balance he thought he already owned. He stayed long enough to watch Ara bend over the organ with instinctive precision. Long enough to watch Julian watching her. Long enough for the first crack of suspicion to form. Inside the lab, Ara lifted a small vial and frowned. This one, she said, it wants to help the top notes, but something keeps dragging it down. Julian stepped closer. Which note? She held out the strip. This Jasmine Absolute. He inhaled deeply, though the scent arrived muted. Jasmine's not cooperating. It's not that, she said. It's overripe. In what way? She hesitated, searching for the right comparison. Like fruit left too long in the sun, she said finally. Sweet at first, then something darker. Julian wrote that down. When she reached for the vial again, he stopped her. Ara, wait. She turned. His expression had changed, not anxious, but alert. This batch is temperature sensitive, he said. If the storage fridge fluctuates even a few degrees, it spoils, she finished. That would explain the sourness. Julian nodded. Ara didn't miss the tension that slipped quietly into his shoulders. Is that common? She asked carefully. No, he said, it isn't. Their eyes held for a beat longer than either intended. Something wasn't right. They both felt it. Later that night, when Ara stepped into the hallway to grab fresh gloves from the supply cabinet, she nearly collided with someone. Victor, tall, still smiling, a smile that never reached his eyes. Working late, aren't we, he said. Yeah, myself played with me or so when me and I said, Ara froze for a half second. Not out of fear, but instinct. There was a particular kind of danger attached to people who ask questions without showing curiosity. She straightened. Yes, sir, I was just helping Julian. Victor interrupted gently. In the lab, her breath caught. I just clean. Of course, he said smoothly. You clean. The way he repeated the word made it sound like an accusation. His gaze flicked past her through the glass wall to where Julian stood, examining a beaker. Strange, isn't it? Victor said. Julian avoiding his office to spend time down here. At midnight, with company, Ara didn't respond. Silence was safer than the truth. Victor leaned in slightly, close enough for her to smell the faint cologne on his collar. Be careful who you align yourself with, he murmured. People rise and fall quickly in this company. Then he stepped back, adjusting his cufflink, smiling like nothing had happened. Have a good night, he said politely, and he walked away. Aura stood there for several seconds after he disappeared, pulse echoing in her ears. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew the tone, the posture, the threat behind the courtesy. Some men didn't attack. They waited for you to make a mistake, then called it your fault. When she returned to the lab, Julian immediately sensed her unease. Ara, he asked, something wrong? She hesitated. The truth sat at the edge of her tongue, but she had spent her entire life learning when honesty was safe and when it wasn't. So she simply said, your jasmine was compromised. Someone adjusted the temperature. Julian stilled. What makes you think that? She met his eyes. Because the fridge door was still warm when I got the sample. His stomach dropped. He walked to the storage unit, touched the metal panel, and felt the faint trace of residual heat. Someone had tampered with it. Ara, he said, did anyone else pass through here tonight? She thought of Victor in the hallway. Yes, she said carefully. Someone did. Who? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. So she offered the only truth she could safely give. A man who knows you very well. Julian understood instantly. Victor. A slow exhale left his lungs, not fear, but the cold recognition of a battle he had been avoiding for too long. Ara, he said quietly, listen to me. If anyone asks what you're doing down here, you tell them nothing except that you're cleaning. Understand? Her breath trembled. Yes. He softened his tone. You're not in danger, he said, not while I'm here. She didn't correct him, but she knew something he didn't. Danger didn't start with shouting. It started with a smile. They returned to the workbench, but the rhythm was different now. Still precise, still collaborative, but layered with a growing tension neither of them could ignore. Julian checked the jasmine again. Ara rebalanced the top note. Their hands moved in a tight orbit around each other, fast and efficient, each moment charged with urgency. And as the hours passed, one thing became undeniable. What they were creating together felt rare. Not just the fragrance, but the partnership itself. A perfumer who couldn't smell, a janitor who could, a legacy hanging by a thread, an enemy waiting in the shadows, a collision neither saw coming yet both were already bracing for. Storms don't begin with thunder. They begin with a shift in the wind. Quiet, subtle, almost polite. And the wind inside Thorne and Company was changing. Success has a scent, so does disaster. And sometimes you only recognize which one you're walking toward after it's already too late. The night of the ethereal launch arrived with the kind of electric tension only corporate celebrations can produce. The glittering skyline, the rehearsed smiles, the unspoken fear behind every champagne flute. Ara had never planned to be part of that world, but she became part of it anyway. Ava, Julian's chief of staff, found her first. Ara, Ava's tone was warm, firm, and unmistakably used to making things happen. Come with me. Before Ara could ask why, Ava guided her down a hallway toward a small preparation room lit by soft golden lamps. Inside, a stylist looked up from a neatly arranged vanity. Ah, the stylist said with a pleased smile. Our muse is here. Ara blinked. I think you have the wrong... No, Ava cut in gently. We don't. Ara's nerves tightened. I'm not supposed to be seen. Julian said this job is ghost. Ava finished. Yes, your work is ghosted. Ava stepped closer, voice lowering. But tonight he needs you in the room. Ara swallowed hard. A part of her wanted to run. Another part, deep, buried, long ignored, wondered what it would feel like to stand in a place she was never meant to reach. Trust me, Ava murmured. He wants you there because you earned it. Ara nodded slowly. The stylist began. No ball gown, no sparkling transformation, nothing over the top, just simplicity. A soft silhouette, clean lines, muted color, something that didn't overpower her, something that let her exist without apology. When the stylist stepped back, Ava looked at her with quiet approval. You look like you belong, Ava said. Ara didn't know if that was true, but hearing it felt like stepping into a life she hadn't dared imagine. The event hall glowed with amber light, glass walls revealing Manhattan like a living painting. Guests murmured over cocktails, Investors clustered in expensive suits, and the company PR team rehearsed lines under their breath. When Ara stepped inside, heads turned, not because she was flashy, but because she moved differently from the room around her. A quiet contrast, a human breath among polished marble. Julian saw her before she saw him. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just looked, not at the outfit, not at the transformation, but at the calm strength she carried into the room. The same strength he had felt beside her in the lab at 3 o'clock in the morning. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a note they'd never been able to get right. "You came," he said. "You asked," she replied. Their words were simple, but the air around them shifted, warm and charged, a language they were still learning to speak. Julian offered his hand not to touch her, but to lead her toward the presentation area. "Stay close," he said. "If anything feels off, tell me." The irony of that instruction would hurt later, but for now it felt like trust, real trust. The launch began with applause, spotlights, a curated speech, a short video about the future of modern fragrance. Then Ethereal, the newest, purest, most ambitious scent Thorn & Company had produced in years. Julian stepped forward with the dignity of a man about to present his legacy. He misted a single spray onto a tester strip and handed it to the lead investor. The first reaction was perfect. A smile, a nod, a murmur of approval. More testers were sprayed, more approving nods. The PR team exhaled quietly. For a brief, promising moment, everything worked. Aura stayed to the side of the room, watching Julian regain something he had lost for years. Confidence. He caught her eye. She gave the smallest encouraging nod. He relaxed. The room buzzed with admiration. "It's fresh, pure, really light, but expensive." Julian's back. Praise slipped through the air like soft music until the music changed. It started with a single confused expression, then another. A furrowed brow, a hand covering a nose, a quiet whisper. Something was wrong. Ara felt it before she smelled it. A shift, a twist, a sourness rising under the floral sweetness, like cracked glass spreading fast. Her eyes widened. No, 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 no. Indole, heated, mutated, turning jasmine from pure white floral into the unmistakable scent of rot. The investors stiffened. "What is this burning?" "No, something else." "What is happening?" Julian froze on stage, smile fading. He inhaled instinctively, and even with anosmia, even with his muted senses, he felt the wrongness. The room shifted from applause to discomfort, from admiration to disgust. Ara stepped forward. "Julian," she whispered urgently, "something's off. The jasmine." His voice came out tight. "I can't smell it clearly." "It's changing," she said. "On skin, it's degrading. The indole." Her words were swallowed by the rising noise of upset investors, fanning their wrists and handing back strips like contaminated evidence. The PR team panicked, and then Victor stepped forward. Calm, collected, ready. "Julian," he said loudly, "what exactly did you give them?" The room quieted at the sound of his voice. The voice of a man who knew how to direct disaster away from himself. Julian clenched his jaw. The formula was stable. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Was it?" Ara felt the accusation forming even before Victor turned his head toward her. He saw an opening and he took it. "Tell me," Victor said, his tone deceptively polite. "Has anyone unqualified been assisting in the lab recently?" Julian's breath caught. "No, but—" Victor had already planted the seed. He let his gaze settle on Ara long enough for others to follow. Investors turned to her. Whispers rose. Is she a janitor? Why was she near the lab? Was she touching product? Ara's heart pounded. Her hands cold, her throat tight. Julian felt the room shifting against her, and panic made him say the worst thing possible. "Ara," he said sharply, "did you adjust the ratios?" She stared at him as if the floor had cracked open beneath her feet. "Julian, I didn't." "You're not trained for this," he snapped. "You don't understand the chemistry." The words hit her like a blow, not because he yelled, but because he used the fear she had trusted him with. Because he said it in front of everyone. Because he let the room believe the easiest lie. Blame the girl no one knows. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of these people. She stepped back, breath unsteady. "I didn't ruin it," she said quietly. "I swear I didn't." But no one listened, not even him. Julian reached for her, regret flickering too late. But she took another step back, then another, then turned and walked out of the event hall without a single word. The doors closed behind her, hard, final. Success has a scent. So does betrayal. And in the space between them, something precious broke. Not because it was weak, but because it was real. Rock bottom doesn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it looks like a room filled with light, but empty of the one person who gave it meaning. Julian pushed into the lab long after the ethereal disaster ended, his footsteps echoing in the sterile quiet. The party upstairs was collapsing into damage control, PR scrambling, investors outraged, but here was silence. The lab had always been his refuge. Tonight it felt like a confession booth. He shut the door, leaned against it, and let the weight of everything crash through him. Ara's face when he'd snapped at her. The look in her eyes, it replayed in a loop he couldn't stop. He had hurt her, not by accident, not indirectly. He had chosen the coward's path, blamed the nearest person, the safest target, the one less likely to fight back, someone who trusted him. Julian forced himself toward the bench, gripping its edge to stay grounded. His breath trembled as he picked up the tester strip from earlier, the one that still held the faint trace of balance Ara had created. He lifted it to his nose. Nothing, no spark, no warmth, no faint flicker of the world he used to know. Just emptiness. No, he whispered, inhaling again. Not now, not again. He moved to another strip, then another, then the beaker, then a vial, then a raw material bottle. Nothing. A cold realization hit him like a blow to the chest. Stress, shock, overload. His anosmia, the condition that had already taken so much, had surged back at the worst possible moment. Julian pressed a hand to his forehead, breath shuddering. I can't lose this, he whispered. Not now. Not when she... He stopped. Not when she what? Helped him, believed in him, saved his work, made him feel seen for the first time in years, or not when he had already lost her. He forced his body upright and crossed to the cold storage unit, the fridge housing raw ingredients. He touched its surface. Warm. Too warm. It shouldn't have been. He opened the door. A stream of air wrong at the very first second blew against his face. Jasmine Absolute. The batch used in ethereal sat on the middle shelf. He checked the internal temperature log. His blood turned to ice. At 4:17 p.m., 3 hours before the event, the fridge had spiked to 34 degrees Celsius, a perfect heat window to trigger indole bloom. A perfect sabotage. And there in the log metadata, a manual override. Someone had adjusted it. Julian closed his eyes, jaw tightening. Victor. There was no other explanation. No employee reckless enough. No new intern careless enough. Only Victor had access. Only Victor had motive. Only Victor knew enough chemistry to weaponize it. Julian felt his pulse rise in a slow, dangerous way. He replayed the moment Victor looked at Ara during the event. The smug composure, the glint in his eyes, the satisfaction of watching someone being blamed for his crime. Julian's breath had trembled with a mix of rage and regret, so sharp it almost felt like grief. He had handed Victor the weapon. He had let Victor point it. He had let it fire at Ara, and he had stood there silent. He moved to the workstation on unsteady legs. His fingers brushed the edge of the leather chair where Ara first sat the night she fixed his formula. The night he first smelled something real again. The night he saw her asleep, wrapped in his jacket, peaceful in a world that rarely offered her peace. He reached for her notebook, the one she had left behind in her escape. He opened it. Inside were not just formula ratios or sensory notes. They were feelings. Add cedarwood so he feels steadier. Add rose just a little so he remembers softness. Ambret is important. It brings the whole thing closer to skin. Perfume isn't supposed to impress. It's supposed to feel like someone's staying. Julian's chest tightened. These weren't just technical observations. They were fingerprints of her mind, her emotion, her instinct, her way of translating life into scent. He whispered to himself, voice cracking, "You weren't the reason it failed. You were the only part keeping it alive." The truth hit hard, clean, inescapable. He didn't just need her nose, he needed her presence, her courage, her sincerity, her way of listening to the world in emotions instead of rules. He needed the woman who could smell the difference between balance and chaos when the world around him was noise. The realization shook him. Not romantic, not yet, but unmistakably intimate. He had pushed away the only person who had seen him clearly, and maybe the only person he had started to see clearly, too. He ran a hand over his face, breath shuddering. "Where are you now?" he whispered into the silence. The lab didn't answer. It only reflected his voice back to him, thin and broken. He reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Ara's name in the internal directory. He didn't press call. He didn't text. He simply whispered, "I'm sorry." But the apology didn't matter. She wasn't here, and the storm he had unleashed was already pulling them both under. There are moments that divide a life into before and after. Moments when the truth arrives too late and the person who saved you has already walked out the door. For Julian Thorne, this was that moment, the night everything collapsed, and the night he realized why losing her hurt more than losing the scent he'd been chasing for years. Some wounds don't bleed. Some wounds don't announce themselves. They sit quietly, pressing their weight against the ribs until even breathing feels like a decision. Ara left the ethereal event without looking back. She didn't need to. She could still feel the room against her skin, the stares, the whispers, the accusations she never deserved. And worst of all, Julian's voice breaking something inside her she didn't know was fragile. She didn't remember how she reached the service elevator. She didn't remember stepping into the night air. She didn't remember the train ride home. All she remembered was the moment he said those words. "You don't understand the chemistry." Not the betrayal, not the injustice, but the way he said it, like he believed it. Her apartment in Queens greeted her with the kind of silence that hurts more than noise. The hallway smelled faintly of rain-soaked carpet and someone's leftover takeout. Her key trembled in her hand as she unlocked the door. Inside, her younger brother Matteo slept on the couch, a blanket half slipping off his shoulder. A prescription bag sat on the coffee table. The label with his name stared back at her like a reminder of every reason she had worked herself into exhaustion. Ara closed the door softly and leaned against it. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She didn't whisper another apology to the universe for demanding too much out of one single night. She simply stood there, breathing quietly, bleeding silently. Her mind replayed every moment in the lab over the past week. The late-night lessons, Julian's careful explanations, his eyes lighting up when she described a scent the way only she could. The sense of belonging that had felt so impossible her entire life. She had let herself believe it meant something. Not romance, not dreams, just value, worth, recognition. And he had snatched it away with one sentence. She moved to the kitchen table, pulled out her workbook, the worn notebook where she tracked Mateo's treatments, expenses, side gigs, cleaning shifts. A new page waited blank. She picked up a pen. Hospital shift 6 a.m. Warehouse, call manager for overtime. Thorne and Company resign. Find cleaning job number 4. Try not to fall apart. She stopped after the 4th line. Her hand hovered, trembled. Then she crossed out, Thorne and Company resign, and rewrote slowly, painfully, do not go back. Because going back meant looking at Julian again, and she wasn't sure which part hurt more, that he didn't trust her or that she trusted him without meaning to. The next morning, she walked into the hospital at sunrise. The smell of antiseptic and old carpet swallowed her instantly. Too many notes, too many layers, too much sensory noise. But at least in this world, her place was clear. Mop, wipe, lift, carry, disappear. At her locker, she took out her gloves. A slip of paper fell out. It wasn't hers. A folded note. Her breath hitched when she recognized the handwriting. Julian's. She hadn't realized he had slipped it into the pocket of her jacket the night she left the lab in a rush. She unfolded it with shaking hands. It wasn't long, just a single line. If something feels wrong, trust your nose. A tear escaped before she could stop it. Not because the line was poetic, not because it was romantic, because it was the only moment in days she felt seen again, and because it proved one thing. At some point, before fear and pride and disaster, Julian did believe in her, even if he forgot it when it mattered most. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table again, staring at the notebook Julian had returned after the event. She hadn't opened it since. Now she did. Every line she had written, all the emotional notes about ingredients, all the instinctive observations stared back at her like pieces of a person she didn't recognize because she had never allowed herself to be this brave, this specific, this present. She had only been this version of herself with him. She closed the notebook and placed it carefully inside a drawer. Then she whispered into the empty room, "I won't let anyone use me again." Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. Back at Thorne and Company, Julian sat alone in the lab, surrounded by silence and broken formulas. The beaker Ara had once fixed still sat on the table. He tried to replicate what she had done. He tried to find the balance again. He tried to smell. Nothing. He pressed his palms into the counter, head bowed. Ara, he whispered into the empty lab. I was wrong. But apologies spoken into empty rooms have nowhere to go. They linger. They haunt. They echo back at the person who needs forgiveness most. And on the other side of the city, the woman who should have heard it was sitting alone with her notebook closed and her heart shuttered tight. Healing doesn't begin when the pain ends. It begins when someone decides the pain can't be the whole story. Julian hadn't reached that moment yet. Ara hadn't either, but the storm approaching, the one neither could stop, would force both of them to choose who they wanted to be on the other side of the heartbreak. Some storms happen outside, others happen inside us. But the rarest kind is when the storm you cause becomes the only place you know where to find the person you lost. It had been 3 days since Ara walked out of the ethereal event. 3 days since Julian had opened the lab door to nothing but silence. 3 days of replaying the moment he had chosen fear over truth. By the third night, he couldn't stay inside the Thorn Tower anymore. He grabbed his jacket, stepped into the elevator, and let instinct guide him through the city like a man chasing a memory he had no right to chase. When he reached her street in Queens, rain was already falling in thick sheets. The kind of rain that turns sidewalks into mirrors and washed the world clean. Whether you were ready or not, Julian didn't bring an umbrella. He didn't care. He walked straight through the storm until he found her building, the old brick one with the rusted fire escape and mailbox that leaned slightly to the right. Her lights were off, but he could see the faint outline of someone moving behind the thin curtains. He stood at the bottom of the steps, soaked through, heart pounding like he was about to confess a crime. Maybe he was. He lifted a hand and knocked, not loud, not demanding, just enough to say, I'm here. If you'll open the door, I'm still here. Seconds passed. Rain hammered the awning above him. Somewhere inside, a lock clicked. The door opened a few inches, then a few more. And there she was. Ara, hair damp from humidity, sweatshirt worn soft at the edges, eyes tired in the way. Only heartbreak makes a person tired. She didn't speak, not at first. Neither did he. The rain filled the quiet for them. Ara finally exhaled, soft, sharp, wounded. What are you doing here? Julian swallowed, rainwater rolling down his jaw. I needed to see you. She stared at him, not with anger this time, but with a kind of disbelief that hurt even more. You hurt me, she said. He closed his eyes. You blamed me, she whispered, in front of everyone. You didn't even give me a chance to speak. I know. She took a step forward, not toward him, but toward her own truth. I trusted you, she said, and you treated me like I was nothing. Julian's breast shook because every word she said was true, because every second he had spent since that night was filled with regret, because losing her trust hurt more than losing Ciel de Nuit, more than losing his company, because this time he had broken something that wasn't his to break. He looked up at her, really looked. Ara, he said quietly, the world has felt hollow for a long time. I've been walking around pretending I can still smell, pretending I can still lead, pretending I'm still the person my grandfather wanted me to be. Rain dripped from his eyelashes when he blinked. And then you walked into my lab and suddenly the world wasn't silent anymore. Ara's fingers tightened around the door. Don't do that, she whispered. Don't make this sound like something it wasn't. It was something, he said. Maybe I didn't understand it then. I was scared. And when everything fell apart at that event, I reached for the wrong person to blame. Her throat tightened. You reached for me. Yes, he said, and it was the worst mistake I've made in years. The rain softened for a moment, as if giving them space to breathe. Ara looked away, jaw trembling, with the effort of holding herself together. Why did you come here, Julian? He took a step closer, stopping just short of the doorframe, close enough for her to feel the heat of him beneath the rain-chilled air. Because the world is flat without you, he said. No dimension, no pulse, nothing alive. Her breath caught, and because his voice dropped, trembling with honesty he had never spoken aloud. You're the fixative holding me to the one part of reality I haven't destroyed. The word landed between them like a truth she had waited her whole life to hear. Fixative, not a compliment, not flattery, a recognition. Her existence wasn't noise. It wasn't disposable. It anchored something in him, something essential. Ara stepped onto the threshold. Rain misted her face. You can't just show up in the middle of the night and say something like that, she whispered. I didn't come to take anything from you, he said. I came to give something back. What? Julian lifted his hand not to touch her, but to offer the honesty he'd failed to give when she needed it most. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. I'm sorry for letting someone else's sabotage fall on your shoulders. I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel small when you're the only person who made me feel human. Her throat tightened, her eyes softened, her heart, despite everything, moved toward him. The rain fell harder, drenching his shirt, his hair, the note in his pocket he'd rewritten a dozen times. She looked at him for a long, trembling moment. Then she stepped fully outside into the rain, close enough that the heat of her breath mixed with the cold mist between them. Julian, she whispered, I don't want promises. I just want the truth. He nodded once. I love the way you smell rain before it arrives. His voice was steady. And the way you listen to fragrance, the way people listen to music. He swallowed. And I love the way you walked into my life without meaning to and changed everything. Her hand lifted just barely, touching the collar of his drenched shirt. And I hate, she whispered, that I believe you. He let out a shaky breath. Then believe this too, he said softly. We can fix the mess Victor made, but I can't do that without you. Ara looked up into his eyes, into the storm behind them, into the truth he finally had the courage to show. Then she did the one thing neither of them could take back. She leaned in slow, hesitant, and kissed him. A quiet kiss, a broken kiss, a rain-soaked, world-tilting kiss, the kind that doesn't solve anything but starts everything. The scent of petrichor, wet concrete, earth, and the faint whisper of something alive rose around them like a promise. Sometimes reconciliation isn't loud, it's not dramatic. It's two people standing in the rain, choosing for the first time not to run. And from that fragile, impossible moment, a new fragrance was born. Some creations aren't born from peace, they're born from urgency. From the moment when everything you stand to lose pushes you into becoming the person you were meant to be. They returned to the lab just after midnight, rainwater still clinging to their clothes like remnants of a truth finally spoken. The building was silent. Most of the staff had gone home, and those who stayed avoided the R&D floor after the ethereal disaster. Fear traveled fast in corporate hallways. But Julian and Ara walked with purpose, not the kind that felt reckless, the kind that felt inevitable. When they stepped into the lab, the familiar mix of alcohol, wood, and leftover bergamot filled the air. But tonight, something else hummed beneath it. Focus, urgency, a strange shared determination. Julian tossed his drenched jacket aside and rolled up his sleeves. Ara, he said, voice steady, we have 24 hours before the board votes to sell the company. She nodded, no panic, no hesitation. Then we start now. And they did. The first thing she reached for was a vial labeled geosmin, earth after rain, the scent that had surrounded them under the Queen storm. The scent that shifted something inside Julian he never knew was still alive. She placed it gently on the counter. This is the base, she said, the moment things change. Julian inhaled the faint trace he could still perceive. Rain, he murmured. No, she corrected softly, memory of rain. He met her eyes and something in him settled. The same way a note settles when it finally finds its chord. They built the fragrance like building a story piece by piece. Ara chose notes the way someone chooses words. Julian structured them the way someone writes music. Their movements synced into a rhythm tight enough to belong in a film score. Ara tapping raw ingredients, Julian adjusting ratios, Ara lifting strips to her nose, Julian watching her expression for cues his senses couldn't give. Both of them leaning close to the same beaker, breath sinking, time shrinking. Hours disappeared without either noticing. At 2:14 a.m., she added ambrette to seed again, the same note that had first brought them together. Warmth, she said simply, the kind people carry on their skin. He nodded. Keep it subtle. At 3:03 a.m., Julian introduced the faintest hint of cedarwood atlas. Stability, he explained. A grounding note, something to hold the storm. Ara closed her eyes, inhaled. A small smile touched her lips. That's good, she whispered. It feels like standing still in chaos. Julian wrote it down, not as a formula, as truth. By 4 a.m., the lab table was a battlefield of blotter strips, discarded pipettes, scribbled notes, and half-finished ratios. But in the center, like the calm eye of a hurricane, sat their prototype. Clear, simple, alive. Ara dipped a clean strip, flicked it once, and brought it to her nose. This time her expression didn't twist or hesitate. It softened. Julian waited, breath caught. Well, he asked quietly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It feels like standing in the middle of a storm, but choosing to stay. He closed his eyes. That was it. That was the scent he had been chasing for years. Not Ciel de Nuit, not his grandfather's work, not a memory, something new, something theirs. He reached out gently, taking the strip from her hand. He lifted it toward his nose, inhaling. The perception was faint, fragile, incomplete, but he felt the curve of it, the warmth, the weight, the human part, the part that came from her. Julian opened his eyes, voice raw. Ara, this is it. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. We made it, she said softly. No, he corrected, stepping closer. You made me believe I could make it. Her eyes lifted to his. There was no kiss in this moment, no grand gesture, just two people standing in the quiet aftermath of creation, and realizing the creation wasn't the only thing that had come alive tonight. They worked through the dawn, refining the ratios. Ara caught the smallest inconsistencies. Julian fixed them with steady hands and clearer conviction than he'd felt in years. When the first stripe of sunlight hit the glass walls of the lab, the final formula sat sealed in a small amber bottle. The storm? Ara held it gently. Do you think the board will understand it? She asked. Julian shook his head. No, he said honestly, they won't understand it. He reached out and closed her fingers around the bottle. But they'll feel it, and that's more powerful than understanding. A quiet pride warmed her expression. Julian, she whispered, we might actually save your company. He looked at her, really looked at her. Ara, he said about tune, you didn't just save the company. He paused. You saved me. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the realization she wasn't alone in the storm anymore. Some fragrances are born from technique, others from legacy, but the rarest ones, the unforgettable ones, are born from two hearts surviving the same storm. And the storm would soon test everything they thought they knew about power, memory, and the impossible strength of emotion. Some battles aren't fought with force. They're fought with truth, the kind that strips away ego, power, and politics until only what's real remains. And in a world built on scent, truth has a smell. By the time Julian and Ara reached the executive floor, the boardroom lights were already on. Every member of the Thorne and Company board was present. Stern faces, expensive watches, pens poised like weapons. Victor Sterling stood at the head of the long table, confident, polished, triumphant. He had arrived early. Of course he had. When Julian and Ara walked in together, Victor's smile tightened. Not fear, but irritation. The kind a man feels when a chess piece he thought he'd removed returns to the board. Well, Victor said smoothly, the prodigal perfumer returns, and he brought company. Ara didn't flinch. She stood tall, grounded, present. Julian stepped forward, jaw set. Let's begin. Already have, Victor replied, sliding a sleek folder toward the board. A full acquisition proposal from Castle Holdings. They're prepared to buy Thorne & Company before the end of the quarter. The board murmured. Victor continued, savoring every word. In light of the ethereal disaster and embarrassment for this company, I recommend we accept their offer immediately. Julian didn't break eye contact. You engineered that disaster. A few heads snapped toward him. Victor arched a brow. Excuse me? You heard me, Julian said. You tampered with the jasmine storage temperature. A ripple of tension moved around the table. Victor laughed softly, a clean, precise sound. That's quite an accusation, Julian. Do you have proof? Julian didn't answer. He stepped aside, instead revealing Ara. Victor's smile stiffened. This should be entertaining, he muttered. Ara opened a folder. Not filled with charts or corporate jargon, but with temperature logs, system timestamps, manual override data, and storage access entries. Her voice was calm, not timid, not unsure, calm. The Jasmine fridge was manually heated 3 hours before the ethereal launch, she said. The override came from an administrative login tied to your devices. She slid the physical copy across the table. Victor's jaw clenched for the first time. It must be a system glitch, he tried. Ara shook her head. No, because yesterday I checked the backup logs. Someone deleted the surveillance footage from that hallway. Only 4 people in this company have clearance to wipe footage. She looked directly at him, and only one of them adjusted that fridge. The board murmured again, louder this time. Victor glared at her. You're a janitor. What do you know about technical logs? Julian stepped in. She's the ghost perfumer, he said. The only reason CL de Nuit is alive again. Gasps fluttered around the table like startled birds. Victor turned red. Julian reached into his coat pocket and placed 12 small amber vials on the table, one for each board member. No presentations, he said, no charts, no spreadsheets. He gestured to the vials. Just this. Victor scoffed. You expect to sway a board vote with a sentimental stunt? Julian didn't look at him. Open them, he told the board. One by one, the caps twisted open. A soft wave of scent drifted into the air. Gentle, warm, grounded, alive. Rain on skin, earth after a storm. Comfort wrapped in something human and unguarded. The storm. And it moved through the room the way truth always does, quietly but undeniably. Chairwoman Hale, known for her sharpness, not her softness, lifted her tester strip to her nose. The room fell completely silent. Then something happened no one in that room expected. Her eyes watered. She blinked once, twice, then whispered, "My mother's coat." Her voice cracked. After the rain, she used to walk me home from school. She always smelled like this. Ara lowered her gaze, heart tightening. Another board member inhaled. It reminds me of the summer cabin, he murmured. The scent in the air after storms. Another, my son used to run into the house soaked after soccer practice. His hair always smelled like this. The chairwoman steadied herself, then looked directly at Victor. You said Thorne's era was over, she said sharply. But this, she held up the strip, hand trembling, is what we've been missing for years. Victor exhaled through his teeth. Madam Chair, with all due respect. No, Victor, she cut him off. With all due respect to you, you tried to kill the soul of this company. Her voice hardened. And you failed. A beat of silence. Then she turned to Julian. I assume this was your work. Julian shook his head. No, it was our work. He gestured toward Era. Most of the balance is hers, the emotion hers, the instinct hers. This fragrance doesn't exist without her. The room shifted again. The board members looked at Ara with something she had never seen in their eyes before. Respect. Real respect. Julian straightened. I am asking the board to reject Castle's offer, he said, and allow us to launch the storm immediately. Victor slammed his folder shut. This is absurd. She's a nobody, a cleaning girl, and you expect us to trust? The chairwoman raised a hand. Enough. Everyone stilled. Victor Sterling, she said, voice precise as a scalpel. You are hereby suspended, pending investigation into corporate sabotage. Two security officers waiting discreetly near the wall stepped forward. Victor's face drained of color. You can't be serious. But he didn't get to finish. Security escorted him out as he hissed threats under his breath. The door closed behind him. The board turned back to Julian. The storm will launch, Chairwoman Hale said, and Thorne and Company will remain independent. Ara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Julian's shoulders dropped, not in exhaustion, but in relief. He looked at her. She looked at him. And for the first time, they stood not as a CEO and a hidden worker, but as two halves of the same creation. Some victories aren't loud. They happen in a quiet room with a scent that reminds people who they used to be and who they still could be. And in that boardroom filled with power and tension, one truth settled like a final note. They hadn't just saved a company, they had saved each other. Some stories don't end where they began. They end where something new can grow. In places touched by time, memory, and light. For Julian and Ara, that place was Grasse, the birthplace of fragrance and the beginning of everything that would come after. 1 year later, the sky above Provence stretched wide and calm, painted in soft pastels. As the morning sun climbed behind the hills, a gentle breeze moved through the endless fields of tuberose, carrying a sweetness that felt both ancient and alive. Ara stepped out from the gravel path into the open field, letting the blossoms brush against her fingertips. The flowers swayed around her like a quiet welcome, their white petals glowing under the sun. She stood there in silence, breathing in a world she once thought she'd never be part of. Behind her, footsteps approached. Julian. He wasn't wearing a suit, not the polished CEO armor the world expected of him. Just a light shirt, sleeves rolled, sun in his hair, a softer version of the man she first met under a storm. You're early, he said gently. So are you, she replied. He smiled, a small private smile meant only for her. How does it feel? She looked out across the sea of tuberose. Like standing inside a memory I haven't lived yet, she whispered. He came to stand beside her. Well, he said, today we make one. They walked through the rows of flowers, their steps falling into the same rhythm they once found in the lab. Workers greeted them warmly, Ara more than Julian. She had become something of a legend here. After the storm launched globally, interviews poured in. Not with Julian, with her, but Ara declined everyone. She didn't want fame. She wanted honesty, presence, and the freedom to keep creating quietly, the way she always had, which is why Julian had made a decision months ago. He stepped back from being the face of Thorne and Company and made Ara the creative director, not a title earned through favor, a title earned through truth. And now, a year later, the company thrived. Not because of numbers, but because the world felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Sincerity. When they reached the center of the field, Julian stopped. Ara, he said, voice quieter than the wind. There's something I want to show you. She turned, and he was already lowering himself onto one knee. Her breath caught, not from surprise, from recognition. This moment felt inevitable, not dramatic, not decorated, just right. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny crystal bottle. Clear, elegant, no label. Inside, a pale golden liquid shimmered in the sun. This, he said softly as Ara's dawn. Her eyes widened. Oh, wait, not with vanity, but with something deeper. Something that reached into the part of her that had always felt invisible. I distilled it from the first night you slept on my lab bench, he said. The night everything changed for me. He held the bottle out. It has vanilla, he said, because you smelled like warmth in a room full of cold glass. He paused. And petrichor, because rain brought you back to me when I had lost everything else. Her throat tightened, tears blurring the sunlight. And the last note, he whispered, is a softness I didn't know how to name until I met you. Ara covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Julian! He opened the crystal bottle and let a single drop fall onto his wrist, then held it out to her. Every scent tells a story, he said, and this one tells mine. She stepped closer, inhaling softly. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was intimate, human, a memory captured in liquid. She closed her eyes, overwhelmed. When she opened them again, Julian held a ring box in his other hand. Ara Fernandez, he said, will you build the rest of our lives with me the way you helped me rebuild my own? For a long moment, she said nothing. Not because she doubted, but because she needed room to feel the weight of everything that brought them here. The night shift, the exhaustion, the one drop of ambrette, the betrayal, the rain, the storm they survived, the love that grew quietly in the space between broken pieces. Finally, she lowered her hand, eyes shining. Yes, she whispered. And when she leaned in to kiss him, the field seemed to exhale as if the whole world had been waiting for this exact moment. Later, as a drone camera rose slowly above the fields, catching the couple standing in the center of the white blossoms, Ara unconsciously rested a hand on her stomach. A small gesture, barely noticeable, but enough. Enough to hint at continuity, enough to whisper that love, like scent, never truly disappears. In the tale of Julian and Ara, we uncover a profound life lesson. True connections often bloom from the most unexpected encounters, reminding us that vulnerability and trust can transform even the deepest storms into something beautiful. Julian, a perfumer blinded by loss, and Ara, a cleaner burdened by survival, found in each other not just partners in creation, but lifelines in healing. Their story teaches us that judgments based on status or circumstance blind us to hidden talents and hearts yearning for recognition. It's a heartfelt reminder to embrace the unknown, forgive betrayals, and chase redemption with courage. Because love, like a perfect fragrance, lingers when we least expect it, enriching our souls amid life's chaos. What unexpected connection changed your life? Share in the comments below, and if this moved you, hit subscribe for more inspiring stories that touch the heart.